Okay, I think people will start trickling in, but we can get going. So, good day, everyone, and thanks for joining this year-end webinar. I think last year at about the same time we had one as well where we introduced the concept of process management along with the process teams as well. The whole idea is to put the job of process management and this process team is to put together like a systematic way of working that drive efficiency and quality for CG breeding. And through an effective process management, we can align our efforts, create efficiencies and reduce redundancies in operations. And by doing through all these things, it will improve productivity and quality. And I think establishment of an effective process management can only be successful through huge and very extensive collaboration and commitment. And that is precisely what has been happening since we kicking off this whole process teams last year. We will take you through, and since then, the process team have been working cross crops, cross centers to make this happen. I think this is one of the I feel it's very exciting that people are working cross crops, cross teams to put together a process where we can work efficiently and effectively together. And so today, through this webinar, we want to present what has been done, how everything comes together, and what we can look forward to in 2024. We have a good lineup of speakers. Arlo Thompson is here to give his perspective on process improvement. Charlotte from GeneBank will be telling us about their experience establishing quality management system. Sarah Hearn and Gustavo will be telling us what has been happening in ABI and BRI with respect to process management. And I hope you will see through all these presentations, you will see that there is a good flow of activity that has been going that lead us to a place where we can say that we are ready to set up a quality management system in CG. And that's what we want to do next. With all contributions coming from this team and also the entire CG actually. So I hope through this webinar, it will spur all of us to contribute towards this big change that we are making. So without further ado, I will invite Arlo Thompson to introduce himself and make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharifa. Good day to everyone. Pleased to be able to join the discussion and maybe share a little bit of a different perspective than what some of you are used to. My background is 40 years or a little more than 40 years, almost all of which was in the private seed industry, either within North America, the USA, or else in other parts of the world as well. So I'm speaking from a private industry perspective to a certain extent, but I think you'll find a lot of the things that I talk about are in fact not just private focused or private driven. I think one of the things that was pretty clear in my 40 years of working in private seed industry and in going through some of this, what you might want to call breeding transformation or process improvement as it relates to breeding transformation. It was very clear that this is not an easy road or a very fast road to travel. You won't complete the transformation that you probably need to do in a matter of a year or a matter of months, but it will take some time. And I think you've already been on that road for some time within the CG and will probably continue for some time. But one of the things that I think that I noticed, at least in my experience, was breeding transformation and process improvement is not just something you can do so easily, because in fact it involves a cultural change, and a cultural change from the point of view of how you go about breeding, how you think, and that cultural change can be both organizational, but there's also another component that's maybe also more important, and that is personal culture transformation, because if all the people involved in the organization can culturally change the way they think about or have been doing their breeding or running their programs or working in their programs, then the organizational cultural change happens much faster. And so we need to think about this over a long term, and how do we culturally change how we've been doing what we're doing. So I'm going to share a few slides. So can you see that, Sharifa?
Yes.
Okay. So what I wanted to talk about in the next roughly 20 minutes is process improvement and the transformation of breeding. And as I indicated, it's a perspective that I've developed over a long time. In fact, the first breeding transformation that I was involved with or had been a part of was really 30 to 35 years ago. At that time, many of you don't remember, but at that time, that's when it became pretty apparent that molecular breeding was going to be the path of the future. And so we had to think about how are we going to fund or finance molecular breeding, because in the private industry, you can't always go to the well. You can't always go to the well and get more water. You can't always expect more funding. And I don't think that's any different in any other breeding program. So maybe there are ways that you can improve your process and transform the way you do breeding that helps you to reallocate funds to get the job done that you need to do. And particularly in a case that we were experiencing, how do you incorporate molecular breeding into the overall program? So I thought there were probably 5 key issues that I wanted to just talk about briefly and mention, and none of these should be too new or too shocking to you if you've all been involved in breeding programs in one way, shape, or form or another. But those key words were harmonization, communication, transparency, quality focus, and accountability. And I think all of you are familiar with these terms. I'll spend a little bit of time on each one, but most of my time first on the harmonization, because harmonization, in other words, agreeing to do things maybe in a different way, but a way that is being used by other groups within the organization, is really fundamental to be able to transform breeding program and to be able to work on a broad basis across crops or across geographies or across breeding programs within a crop. And there are really 2 objectives to harmonization. One is to facilitate and drive communication, I think. And the second is to drive efficiency in the processes. So driving communication, it seems so straightforward, but until the organization across the entire organization agrees on what is the vocabulary or the terms or the definitions, then it's going to be difficult to communicate. So that's why I put driving communication and being facilitated to do that by a harmonization of what the terms are as the first point. I think it's critical that you need to be able to discuss and understand what other people are doing within the organization, and that wasn't the case so much in the past. As I said, you've been on this journey for some time. And so you see the diagram here is pretty much the product development process that's been agreed to, with some of the terminology that's been agreed to as well. And it wasn't easy to get to this stage. It's taken quite a long time, as does a lot of the things you need to do with harmonization. We in some of the work that we were doing realized that we can't keep getting more funds. We won't be supported ongoing more funds, and yet we had to make room in our budgets to try to figure out how do we do molecular breeding, how do we develop molecular breeding, how do we incorporate molecular breeding, and a number of other things in the process. And so we eventually came to the point of agreeing, look, we're going to have to harmonize, we're going to have to agree to how to go about doing this. The other thing is then we had to agree on what are the processes that we're going to use and how can we most effectively drive efficiency with the processes. this whole the whole breeding process is or product development is a process, much as you see on this diagram, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides, a little more detail. But driving the efficiency, particularly at the operations level, where the actual processes occur in the field or in the lab, wherever that might be, is where we need to be looking at driving and gaining efficiency. The role, of course, of all processes is to deliver a quality product. I think I want to emphasize, though, that harmonization primarily refers to communication and processes, driving efficiency in processes. It doesn't necessarily, and probably shouldn't, refer to creativity and science. And we don't want to discourage or harmonize to eliminate creativity and science. That's what research strength is to leverage the creativity of the people that are doing the research. So how do you drive process efficiency without eliminating or reducing creativity and science? And that becomes really the big challenge, I think, in the process. The other thing I spoke about already is that harmonization clearly requires flexibility. You have to be willing to step back and say, look, maybe there's another way to do this that's effective or better. And while I've been doing it this way for the last 5, 10, or 15 years, maybe there's a way to improve the process. And that requires flexibility. And in some cases, it requires a cultural change. So if those are the objectives of harmonization, what are the wins? And here I'd have to reflect on some personal experience. And for me, one of the win-wins is that it clearly facilitates process improvement. And so at times when we started this whole process improvement and harmonization process in my previous life, it was an interesting discussion, and it took a long time to get the harmonization because we had individual breeders within a crop who might say, well, look, when I look at the data, I want always the first column to be moisture and the second column in my report to be yield and my third column is something else, etc. And we couldn't agree on exactly what that does. So what that should look like. And so, or we might, for example, not agree on how to express yield. Is it in tons per acre, or is it in kilos per hectare? Or is it as a percent of the check of the package? Or do you express yield as a percent of the trial mean? If you can't agree on those kinds of things, even within a crop, then it takes a lot of time from software development people or software maintaining people to always have a different way of expressing or doing the process that you do within software to meet the needs of each breeder, much less each crop or across crops or across geographies. So harmonization, in as much as you possibly can put it into place, can allow you to have new technology implementation and development. Doesn't mean you stop doing software development, for example, but you harmonize how you're going to do the expression so that you can divert attention of software development to how do I develop a software program that allows me to incorporate molecular breeding within my breeding program. So it's more a matter of reallocating resources than it is stopping having the resource or eliminating the resource. So harmonization can facilitate process improvement, just as it says on the slide, with technology, also with infrastructure development and enhancements and equipment. The thing that I think we didn't realize when we were going through the harmonization process or doing this breeding program transformation is that, in fact, harmonization, the big win-win for us was that it allowed intergroup organizational learning. So instead of one crop only talking to itself, if you spoke the same language, you could talk to other crops and you could learn from other crops. You could figure out, maybe there's a better way I can learn from another crop how to reach homozygosity faster, if that's a process within your breeding program. So the whole harmonization piece led to a greater scientific exchange, not only from a science point of view, but also an exchange of how to improve the process. Well, one crop can do it this way, and they seem to do a better job, or they get somewhere where they're going more efficiently. Then how can I incorporate that in my process? It builds credibility with other programs, but also with shareholders and your stakeholders. And then maybe also more importantly, it also assures you of some self-determination. If you can look at what you're doing, gain efficiencies, and then incorporate new technology because you've done that, you're not dependent. I think it's interesting that within one of the organizations I worked with, the incentive for a lot of this came from the less financed crops, not from the most heavily financed crops. And the reason was because they wanted to be able to access the technology, but they couldn't do it on their own because they didn't have enough resources. So if we went through the process of harmonization and agreeing to transform how we do breeding and have similar ways of doing everything, then these less well-financed crops could also incorporate and have the new technologies to more effectively develop new products for the customer. And after all, customers, the farmers that we work for, there's very few of them that grow only one crop. Most of them, they have to diversify what they're doing in order to survive the challenges of the climate or the TPE or their markets. And so new technology improvements in all the crops ends up being beneficial to the customer and to the organization as a whole. Communication, second point of the factors. Communication is a bit of a no-brainer. I think we all understand that communication in many ways, 70 to 80% of the time, communication or a lack of communication or incorrect communication is the reason for conflict or for roadblocks. So how do we focus on and make sure our communication is superb? And communication has to be a two-way street. You notice on the slide, I actually put the arrow going up to leadership larger than one going down, because it's my firm belief that a lot of the changes in process and process improvement come from the people that are practicing the process on a day-to-day basis. And we need to be able to listen to and understand what they're saying, because they probably, in fact, have the better new idea on how to improve the process. The other thing about communication, particularly from the leadership, it has to be consistent, must be consistent. And in fact, leadership should be the first ones to develop the new definitions, the new vocabulary, the new terms, because if leadership, every opportunity they have, uses the new terms and definitions, then very quickly it will filter down through the organization. Customer focus is really critical from a communication point of view. And in this case, we're talking about both internal customer and the external customer. Within the teams, across groups, across geographies, the communication is critical, and everyone that you work with or come in contact with is in one way, shape, or form a customer of you as you are of them. So how do we make sure that communication is effective and efficient and uses the same terminology so that we can talk about what we're doing? And finally, stakeholders, both external and internal. Now, you could list a number of other people that you have to have great communication with, and I don't want to take the time to go through that, but surely stakeholders are critical as well. If you can indicate to your stakeholders, look, this is what we're doing to improve our efficiency and have a better process, they have more confidence in you. They develop and build the confidence that you do strive to do a better job with what you're doing. Whether that external stakeholder might be a donor, or it might be someone working in an ARS group, or it might be someone in one of the networks you're working with. So those are all your stakeholders, and they're key to the communication. The third factor, I think, is transparency. Absolutely critical that transparency is inherent across the entire organization, because it very much facilitates cross-organization communication. And then particularly, it promotes additional different new perspectives. Not everybody thinks the same. And if you have transparency and are willing to not play poker like this, but open your hands up and allow transparency so others can see your ideas and what you're doing, and vice versa, then you build a better breeding organization. It builds trust and confidence, and ultimately it enables evaluation. That's not just evaluation of others, but self-evaluation. You look at your program and you say, how can I improve my program? How can I improve the process that I most effectively am part of? So transparency is critical. So we come to the fourth, quality focus. For me, over the course of my career, some of the people on this call I've worked with in the past know that I've said many times, breeding is a manufacturing process. And that's why we talk about process improvement, because in fact, breeding is a manufacturing process. You're not producing a variety or a hybrid or a clone. In fact, the process is producing data. That's what comes out of a breeding operation, and the operations that all of the operations, whether it be in the lab or the field, data is what comes out. That's what we're striving to obtain. Data allows us to make good decisions. Good data makes for good decisions. So if we can most effectively and efficiently run our processes like it shows down below in the diagram, from stage to stage and gateway to gateway, be effective and efficient in our process and generate good data, then we will be able to make good decisions. Good process improvement's goal is to manufacture better data. And you can measure that by key performance indicators. And you'll hear more about those if you haven't already as we go into the end of this year and into next year. One of the things that I will mention that I'm quite passionate about, and that is product produced, data produced, process improvement is driven by training at all levels of the organization on how to improve the process. Every person in every process should be looking at ways for how can I make this more effective? How can I become more efficient and effective in how I measure a field, or how I determine how planting should occur? All steps of the process should be under the scrutiny of everyone in the process. So I want to draw the attention to this KPI, the key performance indicator team that I've been working with in the organization. And we've been charged with developing KPIs for the breeding, for the product development process. In fact, we were asked to develop these. And so our objective was to define a high-level portfolio of common leading and lagging KPIs for the product development process across crops and geographies, and to have this portfolio serve as a guide for product development process groups, and for them to then develop specific KPIs for their crops. So this team, Bridget, Shalfei, Kevin, we spent hours and hours together, first of all, coming up with a list of what we think are the key factors where we can measure how good our process is, how good we're doing the process. And then we narrowed that down because we started with well over 60. We narrowed it down to the 26 on this page. These are, as you see, proposed key performance indicators, because we need to run these through the organization and get approval from higher levels in the organization and across the organization before they become implemented. But these are just a portfolio at a very high level. I highlighted some in red because, in fact, of the 26 you see on this slide, 12 of those, about half of them, really pertain to or influenced by data quality. So I come back again to say how critical data quality is. And the last factor is accountability. For me, accountability pertains to all process groups, no matter whether you're in breeding resources or whether you're in the product development in a breeding program somewhere else. All process groups impact product development, and they all need to have accountability. And To get accountability, we need to make sure we're defining clear expectations and deliverables for everyone. And then those clear expectations and deliverables need to include engagement and support of the operational processes, engagement and learning from other crops and groups. Here we go again, training. Measure the process improvement as a trend. And process improvement is not a single point in time that you say, this is what my process efficiency is on this date in this year. But in fact, it's more important to look at the trend. How am I improving the process over cycles or over years? Ultimately, we need to be accountable to deliver value to the customer. So a quick summary, transformation breeding programs, from my perspective, at least from what I've seen and been able to work on, is dependent on harmonization. It's facilitated by communication, and communication is dependent on harmonization as well. If we started off by saying if we can't speak the same language, then it's hard to make improvements and improve the process. It's enhanced by transparency. It's driven by a quality focus, which ultimately results in good decisions, and then it results from accountability of all people in the organization. So with that, I think I'll hand off to Charlotte, and Charlotte's going to talk to us about other topic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And I will share a few slides as well, coming from a slightly different perspective from the gene banks. We have had a head start at this, if you like, and I'm going to talk a bit less about harmonization and a bit more about the QMS. This is a bit of a chronological tour of what we did in the gene banks. I probably don't need to tell you about the operations in the gene bank. They are relatively easily defined. We do have some border areas where there's a lot of research still going on, and routine operation is not possible yet, things like cryopreservation. But there is a lot of routine in the process of an accession as it comes into a gene bank, to the point where it's stored long-term and distributed. And I should mention also that our work also worked with the germplasm health units. So we have phytosanitary testing and cleaning in here as well. There are a lot of standards existing already that frame what we do. The gene bank standards, the latest version was published in 2004, but there were many previous documents. We've got policy standards, ISTA standards, ISO standards, and the phytosanitary standards. These are all areas that CGIAR is actually obligated to comply with. So we had a very strong need to show that compliance and to be able to illustrate why we're called international centres. Having talked about the standards, the interesting thing about the collections is they're all so very different. Collection sizes, locations, the kinds of crops that are being kept. And of course, there's a huge diversity within those collections that make conformity challenging. But the thing that really triggered us was back in 2012 when we started the Gene Bank CRP. At the beginning of the CRP era, Crop Trust was involved, and we decided to capture numbers, the actual numbers of accessions, and determine how much of the collections were physically available according to gene bank standards. And we found the numbers surprisingly low, especially in some centres. So it became fairly obvious to us that although materials were safe in storage, there wasn't enough material to actually distribute if requested, or a year of a cycle of regeneration or more would be needed to distribute. And a large part of the collections weren't safety duplicated. So this spurred, in some cases, centres went for their own ISO standards, and at CRP level, we decided to adopt our own performance management system. And this meant setting targets. This meant one reporting system that was picking up actual figures of accessions and numbers rather than percentages and more qualitative data. We adopted a quality management system approach that involved audit and external review and validation. And it ended up being a quite complex framework of reporting, costing, review, auditing, QMS, and online reporting. And everything built on top of everything else. So our first costing study, for instance, in 2010, was very challenged because there was no real framework for determining what was to be costed and what not. And so repeating that again in 2020 was a completely different situation after having had 6 years of quality management in place. Similarly, the different phases of technical review were very, very different after having had 10 years of online reporting with performance targets and a QMS system. I think that's probably fairly obvious to you now, but at the time of us building this all together at the time, it wasn't so obvious how it would all fit together. So this is what our online reporting looks like. We've had this online. This is an old screenshot. It's from 2016. This is the these are the figures that build our compound performance targets, and these are essential for the QMS and for the performance targets. Without these figures and without pursuing the consistency in these figures, all of these things would be extremely challenging to put in place. And this is probably a little bit different from the harmonization story here. Here we're trying to reach standards. And we made a very conscientious decision to go for our own QMS rather than ISO, which was a possibility and which 2 centres did pursue. And among those reasons was that we were able to cover all of the processes in the system from acquisition to distribution, rather than pick and choose which processes you get audited, as happens in ISO. So it was holistic, and it was internally driven, with the ability for us to collectively decide where we wanted to go. We also reduced costs this way, and we were able to move more flexibly and integrate emerging risks. For instance, COVID made us reassess some of our QMS, and also allowed us to work in a system where some centres were not as advanced as others in terms of their operations, how long they'd been running them, and the expertise that was responsible for them. So this worked for us very successfully. We shared templates, but every individual gene bank was responsible for their own level of documentation. And we focused on the key processes that conform to the gene bank standards. And we were able to go through a process of intensive documentation of the processes, adoption of specific elements that we all agreed were needed across all gene banks. You can see those in the right-hand square there, including barcoding. Also among that, although it's not written there, was risk management. And once we had these documents, we were able to then trigger a process of audit. So from desktop audit involving compiling the SOPs and checking them for compliance against all the standards. And then that fed into a review process that involved a validation of those SOPs and of specific elements. For instance, the data that had been reported in our external review, our external reviewers were able to pursue a much more intensive questioning involving, show me the packets, I want to see how much they weigh, is it in long-term storage and medium-term storage, is it the accession you say it is? So there was a whole validation step that became part of our external review that incurred a kind of serious testing of gene bank data management systems and helped us become a lot better informed about the systems that were in place in individual gene banks. So it was an incredibly intensive process that, although involved bringing national staff from gene banks together in training workshops, we called them GOAL, Gene Bank Operations and Advanced Learning. We worked with Yanni Van Beem, who's holding the GoPro there, and she went round each gene bank, helping them do the documentation and the mapping of the processes, and then we got together for the workshops. So the harmonization was in the template, but it wasn't in the more detailed processes. Here are some of the benefits. I think these were very much recognized in the reviews that took place of both the CRP and the gene bank platform that came after. There was a strong strengthening of the staff who were responsible for processes, and that helped. We were going through a period of heavy staff succession as people were retiring and new people were coming in. So it was really timely in that perspective. And it really gave some sense of long-termism, if you like, of the processes and the sense that the operations would be continuing in the long term. There were a lot of opportunities for sharing across gene banks. That happened a great deal, people picking up each other's best practices. And it was, it's essentially been the basis for what has been a cost saving, since the costs of the essential operations have effectively been frozen since 2012, which is translating into about 3 million per year reduction per year of costs. I don't think that can be sustained, but I can attribute the QMS to allowing that to happen or supporting that happening. We've drafted more than 350 SOPs between the GHUs and the gene banks. And now we've joined Sharifa's team in looking more at harmonization. So we'd come from a very bottom-up approach with gene banks developing their own SOPs. And now we're looking at the middle level. The standards are up here, the SOPs are here, but there's a middle level of harmonization that is potentially possible in the CGIAR that can strengthen our system substantially, and we think this is a good next step to take. So one of the reasons for doing that is to have a management system that will work across all gene banks. So we don't see that being possible until there is some harmonization in the detailed workflows. So we are seeing how possible that is. I'm actually here in ILRI this week with the people responsible for field operations and lab operations to see if we can work from a common workflow that will allow us to adapt our management system to work more consistently and powerfully with quality control elements. I think there are other really useful things to be gained from harmonization, including the possibility of having a more regionalized approach, a less mandate crop-based approach, where gene banks can act more on a regional basis and be able to either undertake regeneration or other activities on behalf of other gene banks, or potentially conserve crops that aren't in their mandate for their neighboring countries. So I think that harmonization will help here. Of course, the QMS has really helped in terms of many of the aspects that Arlo mentioned, particularly in terms of communication and in encouraging that improvement process. I haven't gone into the details of that much here, but the findings that came out of reviews, workshops, meetings would blend into our QMS system in a really interesting way, as also has our research effort. So if we've brought in a new technology, for instance, we're working on multispectral imaging, that is adopted in one or two centres, expanded out, and then it can enter into the SOPs in a uniform way, which I think has been a really powerful way to share technology and to implement it into routine operations in a very effective way. However, there are problems that persist. It's really tricky finding ways to deal with wild relatives, forages, clonal crops in the same way as seeds. And we have to be a bit more creative there. And also, I think while the system is self-sustaining, I think there is a really important role at the initiative level to sustain the QMS in different ways. And that would be a really nice thing to talk about in terms of whether there's an auditing or a system of evaluation that we can share across all of our groups. Now, here I'm trying to illustrate that we have a lot of standards. That top triangle is where all our standards are that we have to comply with. We've written a lot of SOPs, but it's this middle ground here where we're focusing our harmonization at the moment. And so we've been adopting the SIPOC, which I think you'll probably be hearing more about from someone to follow me, and the idea of a quality manual where we can communicate to the world what you will find in a CGIAR centre in terms of how it implements its processes. We've developed the process model here, moving towards a more clearly communicated one system communication for what our gene bank does in terms of its conservation cycle. And here we are starting to look at stage gating, the essential data and decision points that allow us to move from one step to the next. And this is where we're hoping to build a much stronger data management system to support our workflow. And so this is what we're working on right now. Here's the group. This photo was taken yesterday. And some of the discussions we are looking at in this group is where is the points of standardization versus harmonization. Some are very obvious, like there's clear standards that need to be met with the phytosanitary health. With regeneration, maybe less so. So we're really looking at the areas where we'll benefit the most from pursuing a harmonized or a standardized approach. And I think that is pretty much it. Thank you very much. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Just a kind reminder to the audience before we go to Sarah's presentation that if you already have questions or remarks, you can put them in the meeting chat and we'll address them at the end of the session during the group discussion. Thank you. All right, so I will now share Sarah's presentation. It's recorded because she couldn't attend today. I think she is at COP. So I'm just going to display her recording.
Julie, we can't hear. We cannot hear her.
Sorry, you cannot hear her?
No.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, let me stop sharing and I will try again. Sorry about that. Okay, so the sound should be on.
Good day, everybody. I'm here to give you some updates from the product development
Good.
process team. First of all, it's helpful to redefine what it is that we mean by processes, and roundabouts are a very good example of how we can elaborate this. So when you have clear processes in place, they're well documented, well understood, training is provided about the use of those processes, we end up in the case of roundabouts with very clear vehicle flow. No problems, no crashes, no bottlenecks. However, if any of those elements are not in place, we end up with a logjam situation like this. People not clearly understanding what it is they're meant to do, when they're meant to do it, how they're meant to do it, and we end up with bad situations. Looking at processes, we can look at the 4 E's. Those essential elements to processes about providing some consistency, repeatability in the delivery of products and services. Effectiveness, making sure we're doing the right thing and providing to customers the appropriate products and services within agreed resourcing envelopes. Improving the efficiency of delivery of the right things. So looking at delivering products and services to customers faster, cheaper, or with lower transaction costs to facilitate easier use of products. And then finally, we can layer those 3 elements with continuous improvement to start to deliver excellence within the process frameworks. Now, monitoring processes falls back to quality management systems, making sure we can establish that what gets measured gets done, so driving the appropriate behavior we want to see, what gets measured and gets fed back gets done well, so really focusing on the things that give good return on investment in terms of process improvement, and then looking at what gets rewarded gets repeated, so driving behaviors that feed back into this loop to overall enhance the delivery of good processes. So over the last 2 years, across the process groups, we developed a unifying high-level plan. This described some of the interrelationships between different processes themselves. Within the product development process team, we broke that down into a number of stages. Those stages have been articulated through the use of a SIPOC map, which defines suppliers into particular process stages, their inputs, the process itself, the key outputs, and the key customers who receive those outputs, the key clients. So from the approved stage plan, we had the approved SIPOC. This SIPOC is now being aligned with market intelligence and seed equal to provide a continuous flow throughout the whole pipeline. And equally, we're continuing to develop a common lexicon so that stakeholders coming from different disciplines can more easily identify their own work and their own input within these plans. All of this driving to improved implementation of this plan and framework within breeding programs. So translating from the SIPOC, work in progress is going on at the moment around mapping. Mapping can be broken into 2 key elements. The first is basic process mapping, which is where we take a process and within each stage of that process, more clearly break down what is being done, how is it being done, where is it being done, how long is it taking to do that, and this really underpins SOPs. Parallel to that, we have skills mapping, and this starts to address the who. So what skills, teams, individuals are contributing different pieces of work to each stage. This is then re-articulated into RACI, so responsibility, accountability, consulted, informed mapping, so that we have a clear understanding of what each individual or team is doing, what their role is within that group. And then finally, improved structure around decision-making. So we have more clear and transparent decision-making context, and individuals and team understand their role as part of those processes. Mapped with this then are KPIs. So KPIs, the work of the team here was to try to develop a set of high-level KPIs that could be measured across the breeding program, so cross-cutting KPIs. So just reviewing KPIs themselves, we have metrics, anything that we can measure. KPIs are strategic metrics with targets that are aligned with particular institutional or business goals. So every KPI is a metric, but not every metric is a KPI. When we think of KPIs, they can occur at different levels within process hierarchies. You can have KPIs that underpin the top of a process that contributes to your higher level strategic goal. And equally, you may have KPIs which factor on sub-elements of that process, moving down towards KPIs more closely related to individual activities. There's no magic rule as to where a KPI should be, but the key factor is that the KPI underpins strategic elements within the system, and that those KPIs add up through an informative interlinked pathway to contribute and to be able to monitor your effectiveness of delivery against your core strategic goals. This effort was underpinned by a different group, the Process Performance Management Framework Working Group, which included a cross-cutting set of individuals across the process groups. And their job was to define and get stakeholder endorsement of KPI design principles and processes, which resulted in the delivery of templates to the process teams in which they could use to document key KPIs and metrics in a harmonized, transparent, and standardized manner. Also coupled with this was the definition and stakeholder endorsement of a KPI monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework, which provides a higher level overview of how KPIs can be updated, how KPIs are used, implemented, and what kinds of decisions can be taken coming out from analysis and assessment of KPIs themselves. So the KPIs, we had a core working group within the larger group within Reorganize. That was led by Arla Thompson, with contribution from key members cutting across different commodities within the breeding networks. This group built from existing KPIs, including those that have been developed in rice and maize, with additional KPIs coming in from inputs from the team. They reviewed and then revised these KPIs and worked iteratively back to the larger core team to continue refining, reviewing, and ultimately filtered down from more than 60 potential indicators to 26 key KPIs that are being proposed as the fundamental ones that we want to monitor in a cross-cutting manner to evaluate breeding performance and modernization against specific goals. So this process takes time, but it has developed grassroots buy-in and much improved cohesion and understanding of KPIs across the system. So finally, what are we doing with these KPIs? We're taking this list of pilot prioritized KPIs to breeding leadership to get review and endorsement of this high-level set of metrics. Equally, we're working with crop, program, and pipeline-specific teams to define appropriate targets. For every KPI, different programs may have different targets based on different strategic needs, different breeding biologies of the system, and different contexts within the geographies that they're working in. We're working with the group who are developing the analytics pipeline to ensure that we have harmonized, effective, and efficient ways of measuring these metrics. So what I mean by harmonized is to try and align on a minimum set of ways of calculating particular metrics so that we're able to compare apples with apples rather than the current situation of apples with oranges. And then finally, we're working with the reporting systems to make reporting of these KPIs much easier. So that's feeding into the breeding portal, the breeding scheme manager, and the PMC at large. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and specifically thank the process teams, especially the reorg team, who put an inordinate amount of effort into defining these KPIs to date. And with that, I'll hand over to Gustavo. Thank you.
Gustavo, I think the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so let me share my screen. So Julie, can you confirm if you can see my screen, please?
Yes, I can see your screen. Yeah, you might
in presentation mode.
Yeah, the presentation. You might want to switch to full screen, but otherwise I see it.
Okay. Better now?
It's just next to so at the bottom right, next to where you can zoom into the presentation, you can switch to full mode.
Oh,
Yes.
it's already there, but it's in the different. Let's stop sharing the animation. Sorry. Better now?
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Sorry. Okay, so it's not moving. Yeah, okay. So thanks. Yeah, so Arlo presented the components to or the important topics that need to be considered to implement a process improvement for the breeding process. Charlotte presented the gene bank or experience on implementing the quality management system. Sarah presented the effort that is being done under the product development space. So now I will present what we have been doing here in these three, what we call the recurring processes or breeding operation processes. Mainly these three processes that had been agreed, they are lab services processes, trialing and nursery processes, and breeding analytic processes. Okay, so the main goal, as Arlo well said, is to have process harmonization, because we need to have consistency the way that we operate. We need to have measurable process, and with that, drive continuous improvement. So this is our main goal. So, but how can we do that? We do that through process management teams. The process management teams, the way that we structure that is composed by, first, the process owner, that the main responsibility for the process owner is to lead the discussions, to coordinate the process teams, to drive really the implementation of these the process management work. Here I'm talking about I said three areas: lab service, trialing and nursery, and the breeding analytics. So meaning that we implemented three process management teams. I'm the process owner for trialing and nursery. So process owner, as I said, the responsibility is to lead the discussions, to lead the work. So working close with different process stewards. The process stewards, they represent our different centers or different crops or different areas of expertise to contribute to the work more at a global level. So this group together establish, of course, with the support of some consultants, establish the core team. Each process steward worked close with their subject matter experts in their center and what we call the sub-team. So from now on, I will give more examples on the trialing and nursery, but it applies also for lab service and also for breeding analytics. So I will present more like the structure on how we did things, just because in respect of time. In trialing and nursery, as I said, I am the lead, or I'm the process owner. So I work close with process stewards from CIAT, from IITA, from IRI, from ICAR, the CIMIT, and Africa Rice, representing multiple crops. We together established our core team, deciding the rhythm or the key objectives, also the prioritization in our trialing and nursery scope. And each of the process stewards within their centers established and the sub teams. Of course, the sub team is something that is not like a steady state. So meaning that depending on the topic, each process steward will bring different subject matter experts and continuously change or increasing the sub team. So we did that. So we are in this phase, working on establishing these teams. It's, as I said, it's a continual effort. This is our core team. So I'd like also to say that for this team, again, not only trialing and nursery, but lab services and breeding analytics, similar, maybe a little bit different in the rhythms on the priorities, but similar work. So Sarah also presented the SIPOC. So here in the trialing and nursery, we together in our team, we agreed, and this was approved by all the process management teams. We together decide the SIPOC, meaning all the processes and suppliers, inputs, outputs, and customers for, in this case, for trialing and nursery. After that, we developed the process maps, and we are now in the process of developing the key SOPs that represent the trialing and nursery process in this case. So we are now in this phase. So you can imagine this is an important achievement for CGIAR, because we are talking about harmonizing all the trialing and nursery processes and also lab processes and lab service processes and breeding analytics across crops and across centers. So it's an important step for us. So I'd like to acknowledge the contribution from the breeding analytics core team, trialing and nursery core team, lab service team, and special thanks to the sub-team members. They always contribute to the development of those processes, those SOPs, and of course, the support that we had from many consultants. The process stewards this year, they play an important role because they are the leaders. First, they contribute for the global level, but also they need to lead the implementation and push people in their centers to contribute. With that, we thought a lot that the importance of having capacity development plan for them, for the process stewards. So this year, the process stewards, they were offered many opportunities to learn continuous improvement methodologies, quality management method or skills, and also change management support. Okay, so what would be the next steps? First, development. Of course, we need to continue. If we want to have a harmonized process, or we want to achieve the KPIs that Sarah presented, we need to continue this workforce to organize our process. So we need to strengthen the process teams, the core teams, the sub teams. We need to bring more that. We need to have more breeders, more breeding teams involved to develop those SOPs. Of course, it's not, it's for them, it's everyone together. We need to improve the way that we document those processes, make them accessible to the end users, the way that we share that and so store those documents. Well, of course, we need to develop more SOPs and more work instructions. We need to go really deep into the deliverables. We need to deploy. And by deploy, I think Arlo mentioned that, emphasize that, but I'd like also to emphasize that here, the importance of capacity development. And not only we need to continue provide capacity development opportunity for process stewards, but we need to go beyond and do more for the subject matter experts, not only in the terms of technical, because we will have SOPs, meaning that probably will or change the way that they work. So training for that is important in work instructions. But of course, training in continuous improvement and support on change management. So this is definitely in our plan for next year. Validation. Sarah emphasized the KPIs and metrics. We need to incorporate more those KPIs and metrics in our operational assessment. We also need to improve the way that we coordinate, or our coordination between different assessments to reflect more those KPIs and metrics. And here I'm talking about the BPAT, about our operational assessment, about the breeding network assessment that is being done by Transform Group. And we need to provide more visibility of those assessments to really guide the improvements, not only being assessment like information, but more like target improvement. So as you could see from previous presentation and also from my presentation, we have the base for implementing a quality management system for CGI breeding organization. And I'm not talking here about being ISO certified or anything, but more like having the structure to be in compliance of those processes. We are in the process of, developing the process documentation. Sarah mentioned performance measurement. We have process team organization. We have many assessment and auditing platforms that, of course, we need to improve that, but we have that. Operation enhancement people that, we have a group of people working on establishing those documents, or quality management system administration, as I said here, capacity building. So yeah, we have breeding IMT infrastructure being established. So we have a base to really implement a strong quality management system for CGI breeding teams. But how can all of you can support us, how can we support each other? First, we need to have a strong leadership involvement. Without that, would be, and Arlo said that too, connects well with communication. Need to be supported by the leadership. We need to have transparency, and we need to be have clear communication. Personal KPI development. People, all of us, we need to be to have our targets, and targets connected to the deliverables. Breeders, especially in this case, need to demand quality, and here connects with the data quality. So if the quality, if it's not pushed to improve the quality and really achieving the KPIs, so the improvement will never come. And seek accountability is also all of us, we need to be responsible for our have accountability on what are in the what belongs to us, and really deliver to that. Okay, with that said, this is what I had to present. Sharifa, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Gustavo, and thanks to all the speakers. We have about 15 minutes for discussion, and there is and please, everyone, please put in your comments, your questions, and any remarks that you have in the chat box, and we can get to it. But there's already one question here from Amir. Amir, do you want to come in if you can speak?
Yes,
and ask directly? I think that's better. Yeah.
sure.
Go
Hi,
ahead.
Sharifa. I mean, what's being done is actually amazing, and the steps that we're taking for harmonizing and standardizing things across the different CG centers, and hopefully getting that contagious into NARS as well. But the thing is, okay, my question is, how can we push this forward and get compliance from the centers? So what happens if we get non-compliance? Well, for instance, will we be able to withdraw funds? Will we be able to have some form of, let's say, an internationally known or regarded certificate that we can provide in regards of, let's say, the audits that we do or the assessments that we provide, so that these centers get to the point that this is explicitly, they have this, they are up to that performance standard, or they're not. So my question again is, what can we do in case of non-conformities within, at least let's start with our CG centers. What would be our action plan?
Anyone who wanna attempt an answer?
I can say a couple of, I mean, there are multiple ways. There are, you set targets, you have metrics, you see people getting to those metrics, you do reviews, you find out where they're not being met, you give recommendations, and then you request centers to act on them. And you can, in our case, we actually did funded action plans so that they could reach compliance. I think it gets a lot harder if you're starting to withdraw funds, because in most cases there's a reason why things are not conforming, and you can ask for non-conformity reports and get the information for why people aren't conforming. But I think nearly in all circumstances, if you're coming from a bottom-up approach, the non-conformity normally comes from a need for help rather than a need to kind of be removing funds or what's the word, punishing. so I think there's lots you can do, and if everybody's understanding why the targets are what they are and they all want to reach them, then we've seen fantastic progress in that respect without needing to get any whips out.
Yeah, Charlotte, sorry, can I interject there? But I'm not talking about punishments, not punishment for in that term is not maybe the right one. But the thing is, okay, we've done a lot of development work, and we've been down on the ground with the people, with the centers, okay, with the operators, with the breeders, etc. And we have done some activities pushing for harmonization and pushing for the developing of the SOPs and the processes and mapping out so many things. I mean, these things are being done now by us, but again, what we have pushed for, some people complied and others do not. Okay, and sometimes it's a cultural thing. Sometimes throughout so many, let's say, parameters that are there, okay, the cultural thing, this is what worries me the most, because we're trying to break a certain barrier that we need to at least get this up to a certain standard so that we can push forward with the different centers or have a good collaboration among the different centers.
Yeah, And so some centers are just not convinced by the targets, I guess, which could be a cultural thing, or it could be something based on an issue that they aren't able to resolve. Do you know why they don't conform?
I'd rather not say, but yeah.
I think you need buy-in. You need buy-in from everyone.
Yes.
Everyone needs to get together. And if you have too many metrics, it's too much. We only had 4 main targets, and it was very simple, and no one could dispute them. Maybe we're obviously a simpler case, but if people aren't convinced with your targets, there's not a lot you can do.
Yeah. There's a question from
Sharifa, if I could just,
sure. Go ahead.
If I could just make a question, I guess I certainly tend to agree with what's being said. The carrot approach is always better than the stick. If there's some way to do that, and oftentimes the best way is to maybe dip the carrot in chocolate by simply saying, look, here's how you're going to benefit by doing this. Have a defined way of benefiting if you comply, if you get it done. It's a good point. Sometimes there clearly are maybe cultural or also maybe some personal cultural things that prevent people from complying or agreeing to comply. And then it sort of goes back to what I started saying. If there's a personal culture that doesn't want it to happen, then how do you incentivize? And is it with chocolate on the carrot? What do you do to point out that here's what you're going to gain if you do this? Here's how it's going to help you out. Sometimes that's really hard to come up with, and it takes an inventive thinking to figure out how to do that. And that seems to be a better way than the stick approach, maybe. But I can't speak anymore to the stick approach because I'm not in CG. I don't know where the stick can come from. But anyway, certainly would agree that carrot versus stick is the carrot is better approach.
Yeah. Gustavo, you wanna come in?
Yeah, just a quick comment, Sharifa. And as I showed, so at least from our work, the trial and error, and I believe the same in lab services and reading analytics, all the centers, they are engaged. Okay. Of course, we have some levels, and in most cases, not because people they don't want, is maybe because they don't know how. So it comes with the training, coming with capacity development. It's a journey. It's not something that will happen now. So it's a journey. Charlotte said that quality management system in GenBank started. I don't remember exactly when, but a few years ago. So it's a journey. So we are in the process. There are many people engaged, and I'd like really to acknowledge their support. So people for all the centers, CIMIT, ERI, Africa Rice, IITA, CIAT, PIP, so all the keys, I mean, everyone, ICARDA, so people are engaged as a curve, as I said. So there's also adoption curve. So there are people more engaged, less engaged, so things will move. It's a journey. It's a step-by-step approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Gustavo. Yeah, sure.
Based on our experience here at ERI, we're still establishing our QMS, and we have involved 3 service units, the CCO, the ZES, and the SHU units. So what we did was that first we identify what QMS we are going to comply with. And we have identified the one suitable for our quality management system wherein we are delivering products and services would be the ISO 9001. We use that as our criteria whenever we do our internal audit. And so the service units have their list of non-compliances, but we look at these findings, internal audit findings, as opportunities to improve. And so we are still in our journey. We are in our learning curve. even though we have still a number of non-conformities, but they have an open eye and an open heart to improve on their processes, and they recognize that at the end of the tunnel, what they will achieve is quality service and customer satisfaction, and that gives them the motivation to continue to pursue on achieving that level of excellence in compliance with ISO 9001. So I think the key here is that the staff has to have a buy-in as to what they are entering into. And so the capacity building, the training, letting them understand what will be our roadmap. And ISO 9001, I think, is a very good roadmap in order for us to produce high quality products and services. And then we also build our capacity to conduct our own internal audit. So there are, I think now we have about 10 trained internal auditors, and we were able to conduct 3 annual internal audits, plus we are conducting an annual management review. So in all of these processes, or in all of these activities, we have the common mindset that we are in this journey. Let's try to see ourselves beating that end of the tunnel wherein we are in already 100% compliance to the standard that we are trying to target. And yes, it's a journey. Even for our ISO accreditation for ISO 17025, it took us 5 years to establish the quality management as well as to comply with the technical requirements of the 17025. But at the end of that journey, we were able to take ownership that this is where we are now. We are very proud that we are able to achieve and sustain our quality management system. The journey might be difficult, but it is doable if we have the same mindset, same goal, that we begin with the end in mind. And if we have that kind of perspective and motivation, I think we can spread the QMS even into the different centers. But the key there is capacity building and letting them understand all the benefits that they will get if they will have compliance to the QMS. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily, for that one. Yeah. We have 4 minutes to the end of this webinar. I think I would like to wrap it up at this point, but I have to say this. I agree with Gustavo. I think from what we have seen now, all the centers are engaged, and I think if we expect, if in our plan we want to establish this within 3 years, for example, we have to multiply that by 2 or 3 at least. Then looking at how Gene Bank have progressed from 2010, I think on the slides, to now 2023, it is a long journey. But as long as people are engaged, and we have to continue to communicate this, and as Arlo puts it, training, I believe we are heading towards success. And this is for all of us. All of us need to go into this, and all of us will achieve a good success out of this. So yeah, I think that there's no turning back. I would like to say that we are all moving towards having some like quality management compliance for quality data that contributes to which is part of the breeding output, and that is essentially our North Star, as Sarah put it, in our that contributes to the metrics that we are delivering in all the work that we are doing. So yes, a lot of work still needs to be done, but look out for more things. We need support from you guys, so there will be requests for contributions. So don't shy away, but more communications will come up to this. So with that, I would like to thank all the speakers. I think it has been a really good seminar. Thank you for all the participants. And yes, let's meet again as we have more progress to present to you guys. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.